Why do some Nigerians vandalize public assets? The news of people, Nigerians, stealing manhole covers, train tracks, traffic lights, cables, and so on is just baffling. Over 25,000 assets have been destroyed in Abuja in the second quarter of 2021 alone. Now, funds that should be used to build infrastructure will be used to replace them. That's like cutting off your nose to spite your face. One of the solutions offered to stop this behavior, as you'll see in our feature story, is quite peculiar, so you might want to stick around for that. My guest is the Director General of the Bureau for Public Enterprises, Mr. Alex Oko, and we're talking about financing infrastructure development in Nigeria. This is Dateline Abuja. Hello and welcome to Dateline Abuja. I am Kayla Megwa. We begin the program with a look at some of the major stories that made the rounds this week from Nigeria's seat of power. President Muhammadu Buhari has flagged off the construction of the $10 billion Nigeria Liquefied Natural Gas Train 7 project, asking for timely completion of the project. The president, who performed the inauguration virtually from the presidential villa, said the early completion of the project, located in Bonny Island, Rivers State, would see to the commencement of Train 8. Meanwhile, President Buhari has called for collaboration among countries in the West African sub-region and those in the Sahel to fight the security challenges confronting them. The president stated this while receiving the new special representative of the United Nations Secretary General for West Africa and the Sahel, Mr. Mohamed Saleh Al-Nadif. In the meantime, the president presided over this week's Federal Executive Council meeting, where approval was given for the resumption of the Federal Capital Development Authority Land Swap Initiative. The Minister of the Federal Capital Territory, Mohammed Bello, made the disclosure after the virtual meeting. Within the week, the president paid a visit to Borno State. While in the northeast states, President Buhari addressed military and security personnel of Operation Hadinkai. He also met some wounded soldiers and commissioned some of the projects of the state government.
As I send my heartfelt condolences to the families of our fallen heroes and pray for the souls of the departed, I want to assure you that this administration will spare no effort or resources to ensure that the widows and children of our fallen heroes who paid the supreme price in defense of our beloved country are well cared for. Furthermore, we will continue to ensure that our wounded comrades get the best medical attention towards their full recovery. While acknowledging your collective efforts at decimating and degrading the terrorists and reaffirming the inviolable sovereignty of our nation, I also wish to extol your steadfastness and untiring efforts in the face of the difficulties you experience in the theaters of operation.
The vice president was also out of the nation's capital. Professor Yemi Osinbajo was in Lagos, where he launched Nigeria's first thrift store for charity, founded by former Minister of Finance, Mrs. Kemi Adelson. He also paid a courtesy visit to the Oniru of Iru land. Professor Osinbajo joined the rest of the world to mark International Albinism Day when he delivered the keynote address at a virtual albinism conference. Professor Osinbajo said it has become paramount for Nigerians to have conversations around the safety and enablement of fellow citizens who live with albinism. Meanwhile, the vice president proudly drove a Made in Nigeria electric car at the opening ceremony of the exhibition of Made in Nigeria products and cultural display. At the event, the Secretary General of the Federation, Mr. Boss Mustafa, said the use of Made in Nigeria products will attract benefits for the country. A special session of the National Economic Council will soon be convened to consider all the reports from the judicial panels set up last year to address the concerns of the Nigerian people on police brutality allegations and other related issues. This is one of the outcomes of the 117th National Economic Council meeting, which was held virtually and presided over by the Vice President.
Contacted the police, the Social Welfare Department, or civil society organizations where appropriate. and also to advise the ongoing support throughout the police investigation of these kind of people, and follow-up services, and there will also be 24-hour accessibility and referrals. The startup cost of the center was aimed at 2.5 million monthly, which covered the cost of an average of 50 clients, including administrative costs. The center has also received support of over 6,050 survivors of sexual abuse, as well as children.
The Vice President is calling for more technical and financial support from the government's partners in tackling violence against children in Nigeria. He made the appeal while adopting the 750-word statement on Nigeria's commitment to end violence against children at the policy dialogue on ending the vice, which held in Abuja.
Not only will children be able to report incidents of violence, but when they report, the services will be available to them as such. And we will encourage more states to establish sexual assault referral centers to ensure that survivors receive an integrated care pathway. There are currently 31 sexual assault referral centers in 17 states and Federal Capital Territory that provide free medical counseling and support services to survivors of sexual violence.
The wife of the Vice President, Mrs. Dolapo Oshimbajo, is seeking support for victims of gender-based violence. She said this at the Conference of Public Health Physicians organized by the United Nations Population Fund. The House of Representatives Joint Committee on Army and Defense has screened the nomination of Major General Farouk Yahaya as the Chief of Army Staff. During the exercise, General Yahaya explained that there is a synergy among security agencies to tackle insecurity.
Judging from my experience, it's not one-man job, but it's what could be done or must be done along with others, other services, other agencies, including all stakeholders. Indeed, Operation Hard and Care before I left has garnered this as a cornerstone for achievement of its mandate. We have always operated together. That's why you see the composition of Army, Navy, Air Force there. And now including the police, DSS, civil defense, and all other stakeholders. And as we know, internal security is really intelligence-driven operation. So we need others, including communities, including people, including opinion leaders, including traditional rulers, and all others who can provide information, because the enemy hides within us.
Welcome back. The FCT administration says it will need over 5 billion naira to repair or replace vandalized or stolen assets. That's how much damage has been done to public infrastructure in Abuja, which, by the way, is paid for with taxpayers' money. Take a look at this.
Vandalism, pillage, and sometimes plain sabotage of public assets and critical infrastructure are major issues that pose serious threats to the well-being of Nigerians in the nation's capital. While the FCT administration is completing several critical infrastructure that would impact on the lives of the residents, activities of criminal elements are sabotaging the investments. FCT residents wake up each day to witness incidents of pillage of major components of public infrastructure, such as railway lines and cables, bridge railings, manhole covers, and communication cables, to mention but a few.
We have our share of vandalization in Abuja on the road infrastructure, the rail infrastructure, public building, street lights, signages, all of them. And as you drive through the city, you will see them. And the effects are profound, as has been explained clearly. Probably the one that is most significant in Abuja has to do with the vandalization of covers for manholes. And these manholes are supposed to cover stormwater drainages, foul water drainages, telecommunication facilities. As you know, the roads in Abuja have embedded in them telecommunication ducts, where we have very, very expensive fiber optic cables and other cables that are under the underground pedestal.
According to the FCT administration, over 25,000 assets have been destroyed in the second quarter of this year. According to FCT records, items that have been vandalized within the period include 400 manhole covers, 582 stormwater covers, 23,210 gully pot covers, 467 waterboard inspection chamber covers, 47 fire hydrant covers, and 756 telecommunications duct covers. Residents want the FCT administration to stem the tide of this vandalism.
They could actually contract out some of the things to a private sector, like installation of CCTV camera along the areas where these things are being vandalized. You can contract it to a private firm to handle or install CCTV and have their own security personnel patrol around those areas. I think it will be more effective in curbing, criminalism within FCT.
It is hard to build something and it is easier to destroy especially most of these infrastructures. But I feel security agencies need to do more. Maybe there should be maybe a part of security forces that will come together in the form of a joint task force in every security outfit that we have in the country, the Army, the Air Force, the police, the NSCDC, and all, to come together and ensure that these infrastructures are manned.
For me, I think, we have been clamoring for local government autonomy. I feel that sector is actually suffering. So if the government can actually find a way, synergy, to relate with these local government people, because they are the ones, crime is local. So if they have a way to relate with the local government people who are in charge, they can actually find a way to meet their community and then tell them and make them know the importance of why these things are not to be tampered with, and why it's actually going to create more, probably bring something to the community as a whole.
Several arrests have been made by the police and the FCT Joint Task Force, but the Nigeria Society of Engineers is suggesting several solutions to the challenges, including the replacement of the stolen items with plastic ones to discourage vandals from stealing them.
People filtered away manhole covers. The minister has said it very rightly. As I'm talking to you now, Honorable Minister, we are working on replacing all these metal manholes with plastics. Maybe that will solve the problem. And as I'm talking to you now, we are at a stage, we have taken a product in Lagos, it's under test. Once we pass it, we'll approach you. It's a concern to all of us. Because metal, they turn it into so many things. Now let's try plastics. It has been used in other places. We can try it here in Nigeria. We are working on it. We'll come to your office very soon.
The FCT minister laments the impact of destruction of public assets, explaining that vandalism limits the capacity to develop new districts.
The laws are there, as was indicated by the Honorable Minister of Works and Housing. But we have to all agree as a people that we need enforcement and we need to strengthen the laws. And then also, we need to understand that this is not a small crime, because criminality grows gradually. You could even say in a modular form. A person who will steal a cable at night, risking his or her life, would obviously graduate to other serious crimes. So it's very important that going forward, security agencies should really consider that as very important.
In 2018, the FCT administration projected that it would require over 5 billion naira to replace some of the assets that have been vandalized. The cost of doing that now projected sum, and that would invariably affect other projects in the nation's capital.
In the face of huge infrastructure deficits and rising cases of vandalism, the central bank says Nigeria needs 35 trillion naira infrastructure investments to handle the infrastructure gap in the country. The Bureau for Public Enterprises believes the private sector investment can play a huge role in solving this. But how can Nigeria unlock private sector investments to finance the deficit? And how do we get Nigerians to be more interested in protecting public assets? My guest is the Director General of the Bureau for Public Enterprises, Mr. Alex Oko. Mr. Oko, welcome to Dateline Abuja.
Thank you for having me on your program.
I was reading recently that the Central Bank of Nigeria was talking about how the country require about 35 trillion naira worth of investments, for investments in infrastructure, and the federal government wants all the infrastructure projects, to be screened for public-private partnership suitability and compliance with the National Integrated Infrastructure Master Plan. So how can Nigeria unlock private sector investments in finance and the infrastructure deficit?
Brilliant. I think that the figure that you mentioned, Kayla, is actually more daunting than that. What is required to bridge what we call the infrastructure gap, in the economy is actually more daunting than that.
So we're going to require more than the 35
So we're
trillion.
actually going to need, from the various reports, both from the NIMP and the various studies that have been done, the country needs about $3 trillion, $3 trillion, not naira, to bridge the huge infrastructure deficit that we have. So to put this in context, that means that in the next 30 years, so we need about $3 trillion in the next 30 years, worth of investment to be able to bridge the infrastructure gap.
Let's talk about this gap for a little bit. When we talk about an infrastructure gap and the need for, because I've been hearing this since I was a kid, the infrastructure gap is massive, we need more money. Every time money is borrowed, it goes into filling up this mythical infrastructure gap. Although it may not be so mythical, because as Nigerians we can tell that things are not working in some particular areas and it's an infrastructure deficit. In what areas should the Nigerian government be looking at filling up this gap? You said in the next 30 years. Where should this money be going?
Like I said, to put this in context, you need about $100 billion every year for the next 30 years to be able to fill the gap. Now, looking at the fiscal space that we have, it is simply inconceivable, that kind of gap can be filled from budgetary allocations. So that's the point of trying to, sort of invite private sector capital into this critical space, the infrastructure space, to be able to provide the infrastructure stock that can drive the economy of this size. So if we say we need $100 billion annually for the next 30 years, now juxtapose that with the fact that the current year's budget, 2021, is barely $35 billion. The total budget is about $35 billion. That includes both your recurrent spend and your capital spend. And so compare that with $100 billion. It is very clear that trying to provide or bridge this gap from budgetary allocation is simply not feasible. So we have to be able to look at, elsewhere, the private sector space, where there is an unlimited amount of capital, depending on how you structure, your own engagement process as an economy, to be able to invite private sector capital, both local and foreign capital, to help bridge that gap. That is the only way to go.
Where should the money be going if we're going to see any kind of economic growth?
So it will also involve that. So we would like to sort of, demarcate that infrastructure space into two. So you have what you call the social infrastructure, and you have what you call the physical infrastructure. But we are talking more about the physical infrastructure. So you're talking roads, you're talking rail, you're talking power, you're talking about, the hardcore infrastructure that can drive the economy in terms of making it more competitive in production and being able to provide jobs and employment opportunities for the teeming number of Nigerians to be productively engaged. and just have that base to drive an economy of the size. Now, when you talk about schools and medical, those are also necessary. Those are social infrastructure. However, because of the economics of the provision of such infrastructure, we believe that we can continue to fund that, or that aspect of the infrastructure space from your budgetary allocation, right? While freeing up, the budget, in terms of funding to the private sector to drive the physical infrastructure.
How do we get people to understand that, infrastructure growth is something that takes time and, get them to buy in on it? We saw people stealing the rail tracks. The rail tracks that's supposed to help to transport, food and help people's businesses. How do we get the public to buy in on this?
So you're right. There's a lot of public engagement, in a creative manner that is required to get, the generality of Nigerians, the citizens, to believe that this is a mutually assured prosperity, right? That the infrastructure or adequate infrastructure enables for us as a nation. It's a mutually assured prosperity. When we're able to provide this infrastructure in sufficient manner and capacity, it aids, movements. Not just movements of people, movements of goods and services also. So the economy is about, production and market, right? So if we produce certain goods in certain locations and the infrastructure, whether it is road, rail, aviation, or whatever, is not adequate to move those goods to the markets where they are consumed, right? It makes, the price of those products, a bit more uncompetitive, right? So infrastructure enables business, apart from just being able to allow, physical movements of people, but also goods. When you talk about telecommunications, because that's also part of that whole infrastructure framework, telecommunications enables, communication, the awareness of products, the ability to consume products, without a physical market. It enables it in a way that it has never happened before. So these are all, the infrastructure that aids the movement of goods and services in the market space. Now, when you vandalize, those type of infrastructure, it means that one, if you need to use that as an individual, it is not available. Secondly, it actually makes, the rate at which you access those goods, the price of those goods, a lot more unaffordable for you, because the key infrastructure that can reduce that cost of production at the end of the day, has been disabled. So we need to understand that, it's in our own mutual interest and benefit to encourage, the efficient functioning of those infrastructure and not to vandalize them.
Well, we could go on and on. There's so many other things I'd like us to talk about, but we do have to end it here. Thank you so much, Mr. Oko, for being with us today on Dateline.
Thank you very much, Kayla. Thank you for having me.
Unlocking private sector investments to finance the infrastructure deficit is crucial if Nigeria is to bridge its infrastructure gap. It is a gap that will need at least 30 years to fill, and destroying what little infrastructure we have right now is making things worse. We cannot continue to accuse the government of not providing basic infrastructure, while at the same time we steal or vandalize what infrastructure is in place. It is counterproductive. The key is to see these vital assets as ours and treat them as such. That's Dateline Abuja this week. Please remember to let us know the happenings in your neighborhood using the social media handles showing right now on your screen. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Kayla Magwa. See you next time.